You stand in a corridor of mirrors, silk brushing your wrists, the air heavy with ambergris and rose water, but breathe too deeply, and sweetness turns sour. Beneath the powdered veneer, something rancid waits. You are among the most exalted women in Europe, yet you have not truly bathed in months. Before we descend deeper into this perfumed labyrinth, a moment to gather our fellow travelers. If tales like these stir your curiosity, offer a like, subscribe, and tell us. Where in the world do you watch from? How strange and marvelous that from Lahore to Lisbon, Cairo to California, we gather around forgotten truths united by the candlelight of history. They called it le grand siècle, the great century, an age where gold dripped from ceilings and kings moved like living suns. But in the gilded heart of Versailles, luxury was guarded by a silent terror. Water, not the absence of it, but the fear of it. Doctors warned that warm baths could loosen the flesh, open pores, and invite in deathly vapors. Priests whispered of vanity, of nakedness as temptation. And so the royal body, draped in silk, crowned in pearls, became an untouchable relic, never to be washed, only preserved. Marble tubs existed, yes, carved like tombs, cold and unused. Marie-Thérèse, queen to the Sun King, was said to tremble at the mere suggestion of a bath, clutching rosary beads as though water itself carried mortal sin. It was known that she endured 2, perhaps 3 immersions in her entire life, each one followed by fever, fear, and prayer. In this world, linen replaced lather. Cleanliness was a change of fabric, not flesh. A duchess might replace her undergarments 3 times in a day, believing the threads drew impurities from her skin like venom from a wound. Servants moved in solemn procession, bearing cloths soaked in vinegar, wine, or distilled herbs. They dabbed wrists, temples, behind the ears, never scrubbing, never rinsing. The skin must remain untouched by streams. Perfume, then, was not mere adornment. It was survival. Orange blossom, jasmine, iris, musk, hundreds of fragrances swirled through the palace like invisible masquerades. Each noblewoman became a walking reliquary, exhaling sanctified sweetness. Yet beneath the lace, beneath the rouge, their flesh rebelled. Powder caked over perspiration. Rouge hid rashes. Silk trapped heat until faintness bloomed like fever beneath the corset stays. Louis XIV himself, the radiant Sun King, despised bodily odor, yet forbade daily baths. He embraced le bain sec, the dry bath. Stripped before attendance, his body was wiped with scented cloths, dusted with iris root, sealed with powder. Hours of ritual, never a drop of clean water. Visitors from abroad were stunned. A Bavarian ambassador wrote, "They shine like statues and smell like apothecaries, yet there is something spoiled beneath." Versailles was, from afar, celestial, but up close, too close, every pearl necklace trembled above the truth. The body was failing, quietly, beneath the costume. They closed the windows at night, terrified that moonlit draughts carried poison. They sealed doors and burned herbs in braziers, anything to cleanse the air they refused to change. The palace was a labyrinth of stale breathing, a sanctuary against breezes. Lace fans fluttered, not for relief, but as ritual gesture. Madame de Sévigné, ever fearless of ink, confessed to her daughter, "We drown ourselves in scent, yet all Versailles coughs." She saw what others would not name. The palace itself was ill. Priests sprinkled holy water upon walls, though no noblewoman dared let it touch her flesh. The body at Versailles was no longer mortal. It was emblem. To purge it with water was to risk losing the very barrier between nobility and decay. Better to mask than to cleanse. Better to suffer than to sin. But beneath powdered cheeks, sores bloomed. Beneath diamond chokers, skin cracked. Physicians prescribed purges, bleedings, leeches, but not water, never water. Even birth obeyed this doctrine. Newborn princes were not bathed but wiped with warmed wine, swaddled instantly, as though air itself were an enemy. Midwives whispered prayers, pressing cloth to damp skin, never daring a wash. In chambers thick with incense and dread, noble women slept upright to avoid settling vapors in their lungs. Mattresses were seldom aired. Curtains absorbed breath. Pillows, unwashed for years, festered with oils and powder. Yet they lay in them willingly, believing discomfort preferable to corruption. By torchlight a lady of the court might finally retire, alone with her breath. She would press a perfumed kerchief to her face, trembling, not from vanity, but from secret dread. For beauty was duty, flesh was sacrifice, and behind every embroidered bodice lay a private agony no rank could soothe. They believed morality smelled sweet. To smell foul was to be sinful, corrupted. Thus the scented became righteous, while the clean became exposed. Women confessed to priests not of pride or envy, but of dreams of cool rivers and forbidden rain. Versailles glittered, yes, but it also festered, slowly, silently, its splendor preserved in amber, trapping rot within. Floors polished with wax hid stains, curtains masked draughts and stench. Even the gardens, fountains leaping like liquid gold, served only to reflect the sky. No courtier would touch the water. Letters from maids, never meant for royal eyes, whispered of undergarments blackened with months of wear, of bodices crawling with mites, of noblewomen scratching their waists raw beneath satin, yet never disrobing, never daring to cleanse. The fear was not madness. Plagues had ravaged France. Rivers had carried sickness. Public bathhouses, once social sanctuaries, had become tombs. Better to worship water from afar, to imprison it in fountains, to imprison themselves in musk. And yet this was only the beginning. For if queens feared water, what horrors waited in the wigs, the corridors, the very food they ate? What filth wore a crown, laughing beneath powdered hair? Soon we will follow the lace corridors deeper. We will meet the towering wigs where insects made kingdoms. We will walk the galleries where chamber pots spilled secrets. We will dine where worms swam in silver. The answers hid in crawling wigs and chamber pots, waiting to be unmasked. They entered the ballroom resplendent, crowned in powdered towers that seemed to defy gravity. Each step along polished marble left an echo of grace, a choreography of reverence and envy. Yet, beneath those swaying monuments of silk and strands, something moved, something alive. Versailles was not merely a palace, it was a kingdom of spectacle, where appearances ruled as law. But no illusion demanded more sacrifice than the royal coiffure. The towering wigs and elaborate hairstyles worn by noblewomen, these creations, some rising nearly 2 feet high, were not hair so much as architecture. Layers of wire frames, horsehair, ribbons, artificial flowers, even miniature ships. To dismantle them daily was unthinkable. To wash them, impossible. And so women slept propped on cushioned supports, preserving their crowns through nights of restless, half-conscious stillness. Into this labyrinth of curls and grease crept the inevitable. Lice, poo, as they were discreetly whispered, made their home in the warmth of pomade. Animal fat, mixed with scented oils, formed a glistening paste that held each sculpted wave in place. But it also nourished colonies. "Do not disturb the nest," one lady jested to her confidant, though her eyes betrayed discomfort. Versailles laughed because to acknowledge the truth was far less bearable. Special implements, forged from silver, hid in their sleeves. Long-handled scratching tools, delicate as harps, used to navigate beneath the hairpieces without disrupting the artistry. At banquets, one might pause, tilt slightly, and draw the claw across the scalp. Slow, restrained, elegant. A gesture of relief disguised as poise. To witness it was to see a mask slip, if only for a heartbeat. But the infestation was not confined to crowns. The palace itself was alive with vermin. Cats prowled the corridors not as pets, but as pest control. Yet for every mouse caught, another scurried beneath velvet drapes. Linen walls, never laundered, absorbed decades of sweat and candle smoke. Carpets concealed spills of wine and worse. Versailles gleamed from afar, but up close it inhaled decay. Waste followed the court like a shadow. With scant privies and vast crowds, improvised latrines emerged in corners, stairwells, and alcoves. Chamber pots, hastily used, filled and forgotten. Porters emptied them from windows, sending cascades into the gardens below. "Take care," a voice might cry, too late for the passer-by who lifted her skirts and cursed the sky. Foreign dignitaries recoiled, scandalized not by whispers of adultery, but by the sight of noblemen relieving themselves against palace walls. In 1715, a decree desperately commanded weekly cleaning of corridors, an act that, by modern ears, beggars belief. Once a week, not daily, not hourly, once, and even then dirt clung to the edges, under tapestries, behind chairs carved with gilded cherubs. The stench, so often buried beneath clouds of incense, lingered like a ghost in the air. The women of the court, trapped beneath layers of expectation, fought this battle with lace and lilac. Perfumed sachets were sewn into bodices. Fans beat rhythmically, not to cool, but to steer scent. Powder drifted through the air like snowfall, white, fragrant, deceiving. A lady's maid, faithful and unseen, carried spare gloves, handkerchiefs, and vials of aromatic vinegar to press beneath nostrils in crowded halls. "Madame feels faint," she might whisper, though faintness was seldom from heat alone. There were stories, never recorded, but murmured over embroidery. A marquise who lifted her gown to avoid waste, catching her heel and collapsing into what she had hoped to escape. A duchess whose wig, infested beyond tolerance, was found abandoned, crawling in a hallway niche. Servants swore they heard it rustle long after she fled. Yet all persisted. Why? Because dignity, at Versailles, was performance. A woman who scratched too openly risked ridicule. A woman who admitted discomfort risked weakness. To be noble was to be untouchable, even as the lice touched everything. And there was another enemy: silk rot. The mixture of sweat, perfume, and powder fermented within garments worn through endless ceremonies. Seamstresses, upon receiving gowns for repair, sometimes recoiled at the odor, turning away as though from a wound. But to wash such fabrics would ruin them. Instead, they were sponged with spirits, dried in sun, and returned to their owners, unchanged beneath the surface. Visitors wrote of beauty and pageantry, but they also wrote of something else, something they lacked the words to name. A Danish ambassador recorded, "They are magnificent, yes, but I have never wished so greatly for fresh air." Fresh air was dangerous, they believed. It carried illness. Better the musk of civet and amber than the wind from the fields. As music swelled through the hall of mirrors, reflections shimmered like dreams. Diamonds flared, silk whispered. Yet somewhere in the gleaming throng a woman bowed, too deeply perhaps, and her wig shifted ever so slightly. A ripple of powder, a flicker of movement. Did anyone else see it, or did they choose not to? For in that kingdom of chandeliers and ceremony, truth was the greatest obscenity. Better to dance among illusions than confront the crawling crown. But the masquerade was cracking. Beneath the powder, beneath the lace, something was rotting, and rot, once awakened, demands light. The next horror would not be concealed behind hair or ribbon. It would sit at the king's table. It would be eaten. In the great halls of Versailles, hunger was never for food alone. It was for display, for dominance, for lineage. Tables groaned beneath platters of roasted swan, gilded pastries, and towers of sugared fruits glistening under candelabra light. But beneath the spectacle lurked something insidious, a sickness that seeped upward with the heat, from the kitchens where filth and famine met on the same platters. The palace's underbelly was no place of refinement. Kitchens were vast, chaotic chambers where servants waded through puddles of wastewater, buckets hastily dumped when drains overflowed. Rats scurried between baskets of bread. Bowls of cream, left uncovered, thickened under clouds of flies. A servant once confessed, "When the drains rose, we cooked in the stench of the latrines." Yet the dishes marched upward, dressed in sauces strong enough to smother decay. What was spoiled could be disguised. What moved could be carved. Those who dined upon this luxury often paid a terrible price. Intestinal worms were an unspoken plague of the court. Pale, writhing passengers within the bodies of princes and queens. Physicians, baffled yet fearless in prescription, dosed patients with mercury or ground pearls, hoping to balance humors. There's a tale of Louis XIV, pale and trembling, who reportedly expelled a tapeworm nearly 6 inches long. The court did not gasp in horror, but in envy. "His Majesty is restored," they whispered, as if the worm itself was proof of vigor, not pestilence. Even the utensils told a silent truth. Forks, though symbols of elegance, were seldom washed with water. Napkins, embroidered with family crests, bore stains of meals long past. A lady of the court once remarked, "I fear not poison, but what dwells in butter." She was right to fear, for death at Versailles did not come only by daggers or schemes. It came in spoons and goblets, cloaked in cream. But no banquet, no plague of worms, no secret malady could compare to the theater of royal childbirth. For queens, pain was not private. When labor began, the doors opened. Courtiers, bishops, ambassadors, even curious nobles with no relation to the crown, pressed into the chamber to witness the continuation of bloodline. It was not compassion that filled the room, but protocol. The people must see. The child must be legitimate. Fraud must be impossible. The air grew heavy with the scent of sweat, wax, and too many breaths. Curtains were drawn back. Mirrors reflected the agony. A woman crowned with jewels was stripped of all beside her rank, reduced to a vessel for state. Fainting was common, both for mother and spectator. When Marie Antoinette delivered her first child, the crowd surged so thick she nearly suffocated. A courtier later wrote, "I feared she would die before the babe took breath. No physician washed his hands. Instruments lay on tables beside linens reused from fever wards. Infection was a word they did not yet speak, but a fate they often met. Many queens delivered in beds where others had already died. Screams were stifled, not by mercy but by expectation. A royal woman must suffer in silence, lest she appear weak before God and court. Yet, even in birth, suspicion ruled. If the infant was still, eyes watched hands. Was it truly dead? Was a living son hidden elsewhere? Truth, at Versailles, demanded witnesses. But witnesses brought ruin. A duchess recounted, "I could not weep. They would think it staged." Her child was born cold. She lay still as marble, performing dignity while death lay at her side. After the child was taken, after congratulations were murmured like prayers, the room emptied, leaving bloodied sheets, shattered strength, and a queen, half-conscious, staring at her crown across the room. Sometimes she recovered. Sometimes the fever followed. And when a queen died, court poets wrote of sacrifice, never of infection. Beneath the gilded ceiling of the Hall of Mirrors, generations toasted heirs born through agony. The lineage was preserved, but at a terrible cost. The palace that devoured innocence at birth would later consume it at banquet. Life at Versailles, for all its majesty, was lived between hunger and hemorrhage. There is a final image, seldom recorded yet often recalled, a cradle rocking in silence beside a bed soaked with more than sweat. A nurse hums. A physician bows. Outside, the fountains play, unaware. For all their pageantry, the royal women of Versailles were trapped in bodies treated as battlegrounds. They carried nations in their wombs, parasites in their flesh, and secrets in their silence. Their suffering, draped in silk, was never seen, only staged. And so the myth of royal purity endured, even as worms curled in silver dishes and cries echoed behind velvet curtains. The guests at the table raised crystal to their lips, swallowing sickness with ceremony. What else did they swallow, unseen, unspoken? History does not say. It only shudders